tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We generally have the right to protest.
Why some are raising the alarm about the backlash aimed at the anti-mandate rallies. Also, new restrictions for BC's north as COVID cases spike. And why campfire bans are being lifted in some regions despite wildfires still burning in BC.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Anger and backlash is growing after thousands protested across BC against vaccine mandates. Today, healthcare workers are expressing frustration and fatigue over the crowds clogging the streets around hospitals. They say the demonstrations interfered with people's treatments, visitors seeing their loved ones, and with transporting patients to hospital.
Trying to get these patients in and out, to do with the protesters, on the street and such, and it took a lot of time to get into the hospital itself. Just felt bad for the patients,
And that anger echoed province-wide. On the island, frontline healthcare workers say they are feeling angry and demoralized.
People have given up time with their loved ones. They have worked many shifts up and beyond and still doing so. So when you see stuff like that, it's really hard not to get angry.
Why you'd be particularly being abusive and harassing the very people who may well have to take care of you because you've chosen not to be vaccinated and you become sick is beyond me.
Nanaimo RCMP say a nurse was spat at and reported it to officers in hopes of identifying the person who did it. Despite the protests, though, healthcare workers were back at work today, urging everyone to get vaccinated. Even with all that backlash, there is some debate about the protests. Civil liberties experts say rallies are essential for a functioning democracy. And as Abba reports, they say that public sentiment doesn't outweigh a fundamental right.
After yesterday's demonstrations, backlash came swift and harsh.
Just stay the hell home.
Healthcare workers have said they felt intimidated and disrespected by the thousands who gathered outside hospitals across BC. But this civil liberties lawyer says the right to protest is sacred.
When people are scared to speak out, or they're ashamed to speak out, or they're afraid of being punished or stigmatized, then their voices are silenced and unheard. And generally that just leads to an unhealthy public conversation.
She says the only legal avenue for restricting protest is if there is clear evidence that people have been harmed or prevented from accessing services altogether.
There are competing rights at stake. Bodily autonomy and being able to consent, provide informed consent over health treatment decisions is a fundamental aspect of an open, free society.
But many of the protesters made dubious claims about vaccine science. The rallies included people wanting to protect their freedom to choose to be vaccinated or not. Others were worried about government control through BC's new vaccine card.
The other kind of inoculation record regimes that we're seeing pop up against Canada really is unprecedented. And I'm not surprised that as people see these announcements come out, that they have concerns about, is this the thin edge of the wedge?
The BC card only applies to non-essential services like gyms and restaurants. But critics say the lack of exemptions for vulnerable people is frustrating.
What we've seen from this government is a lot of confusing messages over the last year. Lots of walkbacks of things and lots of changes on the fly, things without consultation. And that makes people uncomfortable, it makes them nervous, and rightfully, in many cases, frustrated and angry.
But the protests over mandatory vaccines may be premature in BC. Only long-term care workers are mandated by the province to have the shot. Other companies are bringing in their own rules. But McDermott says the more restrictive the government becomes, the more likely there will be legal challenges. Eva Yugwensenj, CBC News, Vancouver.
And northern BC is being blanketed with more COVID restrictions. Numbers there are spiking, so new rules are about to take effect. Tanya Fletcher is live with us with the latest on this. Tanya, what's changing?
Well, these regional restrictions are similar to the ones currently specific to Interior Health, Anita. So as of Tuesday, right after the long weekend, here's what will be coming for Northern Health. Personal indoor gatherings like dinner parties will be limited to 5 total guests or 1 other family. Personal outdoor gatherings like birthday parties or barbecues will be capped at 50 people. And organized outdoor events with more than 200 people will need a COVID safety plan in place. Now, the provincial health officer says the region has seen rapid spread, especially in the past 10 days, and it's primarily been driven by social gatherings.
Where we've seen a 6 times increased rate of transmission that has led to hospitalizations and filling up of our ICUs across the north.
Health officials say the vast majority of people in northern health hospitals right now, about 90% or so, are unvaccinated. So how did we get here? Well, our Justin McElroy crunched some of the numbers. Take a look. So the places outside the interior with the lowest vaccination rates in BC are in the north. Now look at the local health areas outside the interior with the highest per capita transmission last week. And once again, all of them are mostly headlined by the north there too. So the big question is how long these regional restrictions will remain in place. Well, health officials haven't set a hard date, but they point out targeted measures in the interior have been successful in driving down cases. And there are still many questions to be answered with BC's vaccine card rollout as well with the logistics. So starting September 13th, you'll need to show proof of at least 1 dose for certain non-essential businesses and activities. And we learned one new tidbit today. Fast food restaurants will not be included in that. Full details, though, we're promised will be announced on Tuesday. Anita?
Tanya Fletcher live with us tonight. Thanks, Tanya. These new restrictions come as BC's rolling average continues to rise. Today's daily case count spiked to more than 800. Sadly, 6 more people have died of the virus. But for the first time since mid-July, Fraser Health had the highest total of cases among the regions, overtaking Interior Health by 30 cases. More than 7,000 people got their first vaccine yesterday, and that's more than 1% of remaining eligible people who have not been vaccinated. We now know there have been 9 cases in BC of people taking the livestock dewormer Ivermectin to try to treat a percent of COVID-19. BC's Drug and Poisoning Centre says these cases haven't had any serious adverse effects. The centre says it had not received any calls about people ingesting the drug prior to this year. Veterinary-grade ivermectin is not approved to treat COVID-19. Health Canada warns high doses can be dangerous for humans, which could result in diarrhea, seizures, coma, or even death. In response to many BC communities' need for more space in the classroom, 16 new and improved schools will soon open across the province in time for this school year. That includes brand new schools in Surrey, Langley, Chilliwack, and elsewhere. Other locations have seen expansions, seismic upgrades, or near total replacements of aging buildings. In total, 8,600 students will benefit from these upgrades when they open next week. A new Skytrain stop is coming to Richmond. Crews have broken ground on Capstan Station.
This Capstan Station is an example. It's a great example of how various parties, in this case TransLink and the City of Richmond, and various development partners worked together to make this particular station happen.
Capstan Station will be built at Number 3 Road and Capstan Way. The new station will be between the existing Bridgeport and Aberdeen stops. TransLink plans to have Capstan Station ready for riders by 2023. According to the city, it'll be much needed, with 16,000 people expected to move to the Capstan area in the next few years. And police are looking to talk with a woman who witnesses say was sexually assaulted at Pacific Centre Mall.
Our officers have identified a suspect. We have a suspect in mind, but we need to speak to the victim in this case to gather more information in order for Crown Counsel to lay a charge.
Witnesses saw a man approach a woman from behind and grope her buttocks on August 27th at around 5 p.m. The suspect fled, but officers caught up to the man on a bus near Hastings and Abbott. The man has now been released from custody pending further investigation. Anyone with information is asked to call a VPD. Well, the issues surrounding the protest of old-growth logging on southern Vancouver Island are starting to play out in this federal election campaign. While it's not the conflict at the Fairy Creek watershed itself that could impact the results of the vote, it's things like police use of force, Indigenous land rights, and climate change that may make a difference at the ballot box. A little over a year ago, the first protesters arrived at the Fairy Creek watershed to stop the logging of old-growth forest. Now the blockade has become an environmental flashpoint in this federal election.
We're seeing more and more people understanding that all of those issues, policing, racial justice, Indigenous sovereignty, classism, economic development, are issues of climate justice, that they are threaded together.
Stand down, man!
Since mid-May, RCMP officers have been enforcing an injunction at the site, arresting more than 800 people. Protesters accuse the officers of using excessive force and blocking media coverage.
Pachidat territory!
The Pachidat First Nation has asserted its own rights here and was granted a 2-year deferral on old-growth logging.
People who are interested in the intersection of those issues might think about it at the ballot box.
Local candidates are counting on it. The NDP incumbent says he's focused on promoting Indigenous-led stewardship in the area.
It's incumbent upon us to really make sure that we are giving them the time and space.
His opponents, though, criticize him for not taking a more prominent role with the province to de-escalate the situation, including Blair Herbert, whose Liberal Party has promised $50 million to protect old-growth forests.
That whole area out there was built, by loggers, really. And those people need to have a voice at the table in order to get this stuff resolved.
The Green candidate says she would work across party lines to reach a peaceful solution for all those involved.
I'm terrified that someone is going to be maimed or killed.
Vancouver Island typically leans left, but strategic voters could push it towards the middle.
Might make them more likely to support the Liberals because they would see the Conservatives as the party that could plausibly win an election.
A compromise they may be willing to take. And today was quieter on the federal election campaign trail as the leaders gather in Quebec for the first French language debate. But that debate is happening without Green Party leader Annamie Paul. Meanwhile, BC's Green candidates who took to Kitsilano Beach are previewing their climate-focused platform, which is expected to be released next week.
We need right now to make it clear that the one issue in this election should be the climate emergency. Everything else is important, but nothing else represents a threat to our survival if we get it wrong in the next couple of years.
But BC's Green candidates made it clear their policies will substantially focus on combating climate change. They're setting more ambitious sustainability goals. They're pledging to one-up the Liberals' emission reduction target by aiming to go negative by 2050 instead of net zero. They're also promising to work toward transitioning away from the fossil fuel industry and to stop the construction of the TMX pipeline. Well, bring on the toasted marshmallows. The campfire ban is being lifted for most of BC's coastal fire center. Starting Friday at noon, you can light up your campfire, patio torches, and outdoor stoves. Fire risks are down thanks to the recent rainfall and cooler temperatures. But there's a big exception. The ban remains in place for the South Island Resource District. The region that covers the southern third of Vancouver Island is still too dry for open flames. Now, the ban also remains in place for the Kamloops Fire Center and parts of the Southeast Fire Center. Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now with the forecast. And Joe, I imagine a lot more of that relief coming for the fires this weekend.
That's right, Anita. Yeah, we have more showers on tap, but as we get the latest model runs in, the weekend is looking more and more like you might want to go on a camping trip. Less rain, more sunshine, but no alarming temperatures over the next 4 or 5 days. Let me start off with the current temperatures out there right now. We were finally at our seasonal for much of the south coast today. It was a beautiful summer day, 20 for YVR, 24 out towards Abbotsford right now, 23 at YYJ Victoria Airport, and hitting the high 20s on the east coast of the island. So that's all thanks to this big high pressure ridge just dominating for 2 days and 2 days only. it's going to be pushed eastward, maintaining its strength in the interior for a couple more days. We've still got a summer-like forecast for you in places like Kamloops and Kelowna for a couple more days, but you can see that low approaching on the left. That is what's going to bring us our rain for Saturday night. But at this point, it might just be a Saturday overnight into Sunday story. I know earlier forecast models had Saturday as a bit of a washout. Just pausing you tomorrow afternoon, you can see increasing cloud for the south coast. So we'll start off with some sunshine tomorrow for Vancouver. Clouds will roll in, but I think the showers will hold off until this guy makes an appearance Saturday night. So Anita, I'll time out that system a little more, and we'll talk about the holiday Monday coming up.
Okay, this is good news I wasn't expecting. Thanks, Jo.
Exactly. You're welcome.
Lebanese British Columbians are mobilizing to help people suffering through the economic crisis gripping their home country. The CBC's Michelle Gassoub has more on what's being done.
We have a bit of everything. We have Tylenol, Advil, ibuprofen, aspirin, baby milk formula, tampons, diapers.
They may sound like items available at any drugstore, but they're supplies that have become near impossible to find in Lebanon.
Everything over the counter that you can get, we actually went and got.
Lebanon's currency has devalued wildly, making salaries worthless and essential items hard to come by.
I had a friend of mine reach out to me 2 weeks ago. She's a very dear friend of mine, and she was asking me, I can't afford milk for my kids. She has 2 kids, 1-year-old and 2-year-old, and she's making what's worth $20 a month. For me, that was a tipping point where I reached out to my friends, Johanna and Patrick, and I said, I need to get her milk.
These friends are taking matters into their own hands, flying $4,000 worth of supplies to Beirut.
Hopefully, if every time a Lebanese goes and fills a suitcase or 2, it could make such a huge difference in a few families' lives.
And they're not alone. In cities around the world, Lebanese are filling suitcases like it's a high-stakes game of Tetris. Some airlines even increasing the baggage allowance for people flying to Lebanon in recognition of the crisis.
We were forced to be expats, and we have a duty to actually do whatever we can to support the people back home and maybe one day return and live there with dignity, respect.
The friends now face a long journey from Vancouver to Beirut and fears items will be confiscated along the way.
We've heard accounts from first-hand accounts that some stuff sometimes are being taken out of the suitcases. So we do actually hope this won't happen to us, because this is all going to grassroots organizations.
And there are those items that can't be imported in a suitcase, as Lebanon also faces ongoing shortages of electricity and fuel.
It's your homeland, no matter what, it remains your homeland. So you gotta do whatever you can do to help.
Still, some hope for a nation packed to the brim in 6 suitcases. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. I'm your host, Anita Bathe. And if you're not already doing it, you can always watch our program live on our free app, CBC Gem. You can also catch us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. The Alberta hospital system is straining under a crushing 4th wave of COVID. Why, despite growing calls to act, the Alberta government is staying the course. That's next. Thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Okay, millions play them. Some even make a career out of it. Gaming is bigger than ever. But if you actually want to make a video game, you don't need to be a part of a big company to do it. Stephen Cook has a look at Edmonton's indie game scene.
The massive game developer BioWare has famously made Edmonton its home for decades. It's behind massive hits like the Mass Effect and Dragon Age series. In recent years, it's been joined by other big-name studios like Improbable and Beamdog. But, just like in many successful games, there's fierce competition, and the city is seeing an explosion of smaller independent studios. Out of his North Edmonton home, Kyle Kulik runs the studio he founded more than a decade ago.
Having wanted to go into video games since I was a kid, I felt that I'd absolutely regret it if I didn't at least take a shot at it.
Kulik says over the last several years, the programming architecture for games has become much more affordable and user-friendly for would-be creators. Digital platforms also now offer the chance to get more games out to the masses. But Kulik says it's not an easy journey.
You never know what you're going to be able to do next, what you're going to have funding to do next, how big your team's going to be for the next time. And that inconsistency is a very big part of the struggle.
Video games are big business, generating an estimated $3.6 billion in revenue for Canada in 2019. 4 years ago, the Edmonton Screen Industries Office launched with an aim to support various media, including video games. The office offers workshops and small grants to help get projects off the ground.
I think we're seeing continued growth, and I expect that we'll continue to do that. That's our hope and our goal in our office is to foster that growth.
We believe there's a wonderful talent pool here in Edmonton out of the University of Alberta, Grant McEwen, Nate, and then also just some independent people that have turned their hobby into much more of a skill.
Alex Russell says that kind of support has helped him grow his own development company. VR Cave's specialty is virtual reality games catered to entertainment companies. It's gone from just Russell and his brother to 12 employees.
The best thing about kind of getting into this industry and kind of starting our own company is that we're really passionate about video games, and we're able to pursue that passion.
The Edmonton Screen Industries Office estimates there are about 75 independent video game studios in Edmonton, all part of a local industry with global reach that is continuing to level up. Stephen Cook, CBC News, Edmonton.
Canada's 4 largest provinces, all except Alberta, have now gone ahead with a vaccine certification strategy. Premier Jason Kenney has previously resisted the system and is still holding out on making a decision. As Aaron Collins shows us, some Albertans are pressuring him to act.
Over morning coffee in Calgary, the idea of vaccine passports, a hot topic.
I think it's a good idea just for the safety of the general population and also people at risk who aren't able to get the vaccine.
But in Alberta, restricting freedoms, any freedoms, always a tough sell.
I don't think it's right. We've got a freedom of choice. I'm fully vaccinated. That was my freedom. I don't like identifying other people who disagree with me. Let them go.
The official opposition is on board, calling for a passport system to be up and running by the end of the month, criticizing the Premier for dragging his feet.
Alberta is leading the country in cases, and that is because we led the country in recklessness. And, sooner or later, Jason Kenney is going to have to take responsibility for that.
For his part, the Premier hasn't appeared in public in weeks, on vacation as COVID cases spiked, before popping up on Facebook last night, hinting some action on COVID is coming before the end of the week.
And that doesn't mean vaccine passports, in my view, but it means please people, if you're not getting vaccinated, please act responsibly.
It's a position that baffles this political watcher.
It's perplexing that he's been silent for so long, and it's also perplexing that he seems to be focusing on a strategy to please the anti-vaxxers.
And there are worries this fourth wave could soon overwhelm Alberta's healthcare system.
We are tired of it, but the reality is we will get there, and we will, exceed hospital capacity in the coming weeks unless something changes.
But as COVID cases continue to surge, Albertans continue to wait for something, anything from a government missing in action for weeks. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Calgary.
Religion is one of the reasons cited by some people for refusing to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Sean Kavanagh asked some religious leaders to weigh in on the controversy.
At a rally this week in Steinbach opposing vaccinations and mask mandates in schools, an organizer invokes Christian values as part of her objections.
It's about freedom. That's what we're here for. That's what this country was founded on, godly principles of freedom.
CBC News has contacted religious leaders and academics in a number of faiths. The Winnipeg Council of Rabbis recently released a statement about the importance of getting vaccinated. Rabbi Khalil Rose is part of that council and says he knows nothing in Jewish law that would prompt people to oppose current public health orders based on their faith. In fact, an even higher principle is at play.
Saving a life, pardon the term, overrides every other legal requirement. So if that means doing something that is contrary to the Jewish legal system in order to save a life, that is the absolute priority.
Rose says there are some Jewish people in Winnipeg who oppose vaccination mandates, but they're a small minority. The president of the Manitoba Islamic Association says something similar. Muslims believe in protecting people's health.
There aren't any religious objections to vaccinations from an Islamic perspective, none whatsoever. It's to the contrary. We're encouraged to seek the cure where we can find it, and preservation of life is one of the higher purposes of the faith.
Head of the Canadian Mennonite University says there is nothing in their church's traditions that would oppose vaccinations or other health orders for religious reasons.
Well, generally, the communities that right now are resisting vaccine would actually be very sympathetic to caring for the other, to living and doing things that wouldn't be about their own, what's best for me, but would be about what is best for the other.
Sean Cavanaugh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
COVID-19 vaccines have already proven they reduce the chances of serious illness. As Tessa Arcilia reports, new research is showing the further benefits, including the impact on so-called long COVID.
For a long time, not much has really been known about long COVID, the far-reaching impact, the lasting effects, and some debilitating symptoms still lingering on for months or even longer. Now, this new research today, led by King's College London and published in the Lancet Infectious Diseases, it found that being fully vaccinated against COVID-19 not only cuts the risk of catching the virus, but in the rare event of an infection, the risk of getting long COVID is cut in half. Now, this study looked at more than 1 million adults who received one shot and almost 1 million who received 2 shots between December last year and July of this year. And it found that 0.2% of the fully vaccinated had a breakthrough infection. That is a small number, and of those, only 5% went on to have long COVID. I asked the lead researcher, Dr. Claire Steeves, about what this means.
We found that there was a significantly reduced risk of people getting long COVID if they'd been vaccinated. And so that's really important news, and it's the case in all age groups. The chances that you have absolutely no symptoms at all are about doubled if you've been vaccinated.
Dr. Steve said this is the first real piece of evidence we have that there is a good preventative strategy against getting long COVID, and she said that strategy is to get fully vaccinated. Now, she does issue a word of caution, though. She says that while being fully vaccinated prevents you from either getting a serious disease or getting symptoms or even getting long COVID, it doesn't prevent one from being a carrier. So she says it's still important to consistently test oneself and to still observe social distancing or being careful around people who might be extremely vulnerable to catching the virus. Tessa Arcilia, CBC News, London.
For many Canadians, the pandemic has put a spotlight on mental health, revealing stories of people struggling themselves or with a loved one who is. The main parties have noticed. As Hannah Thibodeau explains, they've been quick to talk about what they'll do to help.
Christian Spilfogel spent more than a decade trying to get his daughter proper mental health treatment.
I almost felt helpless, actually.
She tried to take her life many times.
She did cutting. She would try and overdose. Sorry. Yeah, it was difficult. Sorry.
He's relieved to see each of the main parties make mental health a priority.
Dedicated Canada Mental Health Transfer.
The Liberals are promising to create a mental health transfer, $4.5 billion over 5 years. and $500 million to help hire 1,200 new counselors at post-secondary schools.
We will start by investing billions in public health care.
The Conservatives say they would invest $60 billion over 10 years for health care, though how much for mental health would be up to each province. It's also promising a 25% tax credit to encourage employers to add coverage to their employee benefit plans.
We want to see our healthcare system include mental health.
The NDP has promised to make mental health care available to all Canadians and are promising to support struggling parents.
I can't tell you how desperate I am or how exhausted I am.
Jesse Green's son suffered a mental health crisis in March after multiple pleas for help.
Just barely speaking, not eating, not sleeping, pacing the floors, almost catatonic.
She hopes the campaign promises turn into real action.
I'd like to see actual advocacy for every single psych patient.
Spilfogel says he's glad all the political leaders are talking seriously about mental health.
That they acknowledge that they have these same issues within their families helps reduce the stress in other families to be able to say, me too.
With the ongoing strain of the COVID-19 pandemic, Canada has so many more families who need the help. Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Ottawa.
They were largely protesting vaccine passports and government mandates, but whether you agree with them or not, one lawyer says new COVID policies could face some serious legal challenges. That's next.
HMCS Kootenay was back at its base in Esquimalt this afternoon after spending 3 days and nights shadowing the Soviet ships, 3 of which are armed with guided missiles. The shadowing exercise took place over 1,600 kilometers. The U.S. Navy first spotted the Russians off Alaska. The Canadians intercepted them as they steamed toward Tofino on Vancouver Island. About 100 kilometers off the BC coast, the Russians suddenly headed in a southwesterly direction. Commander Brian Beckett was in charge of the chase.
Were any weapons fired out there?
Yes, I observed the Soviet cruiser doing gunnery exercises last evening. He, of course, wasn't firing them at me. He was just exercising, as is his right in international waters.
But there were no weapons fired at you, nor vice versa?
No, certainly not.
How close did any or all of those ships get to you?
The nearest I got to any ship, which was one of the Krivac destroyers, was 150 yards.
Did you say 150 yards?
150 yards, yes. I normally wouldn't go that close, but he came over a little closer to me to make a point, and but that is not an extreme situation, and I really wasn't concerned for safety. Things were well in hand.
The Soviet ships are now reported 500 kilometers off the coast of Oregon. Russ Patrick, CBC News, Canadian Forces Base, Esquimalt.
For 7 years now, this Japanese truck maker has been assembling these trucks right here in Vancouver. Windshields, tires, and other accessories are bought in Canada. Just the heavy components come in from Japan. So these mid-sized diesel trucks have about 35% Canadian content.
We're manufacturing a Japanese product, automotive product in Canada. We're employing Canadian people, and we put as much Canadian content into that vehicle as possible.
But it has been a frustrating experience for the company. They say that governments at all levels don't seem to be interested in their trucks, even if they are the low bidder.
I feel that there's more confusion in how the tenders are let, especially federally, than there is any specific reason for not awarding it to ourselves.
So far, only one small town in Newfoundland has bought the trucks, in spite of good test reports, notably from Canadian National Railways. The company sold about 400 trucks last year in Canada. It employs normally 40 Canadian workers, but because of the recession, only 10 are presently working. And it has not received any financial help from any government. This is an example of the kind of Canadian content in the auto industry Ottawa has been looking for. But so far, Ottawa does not seem to have noticed. Georges Tremel, CBC News, Vancouver.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News. Starting Friday at noon in most of BC's coastal fire centre, you can light up campfires, patio torches, and outdoor stoves. Fire risks are down thanks to the recent rainfall and cooler temperatures. The fire ban stays in place for the South Island Resource District, Kamloops Fire Centre, and parts of the Southeast Fire Centre. High COVID case numbers mean restrictions are returning to BC's north. Effective September 7th, personal gatherings in homes will be limited to 1 additional family or 5 guests. Outdoor gatherings will be limited to 50 people. Dr. Bonnie Henry says cases have exploded in a number of communities. And today there's been frustration from healthcare workers over protests on COVID mandates yesterday. Thousands gathered on streets outside hospitals across BC, clogging main access routes. For people attending the rallies, many say their fight is largely about maintaining their civil rights.
When I became a nurse, I made an oath to advocate for my patients, and patients have the right to refuse. It's in BC law. It's what we were taught in school.
Everybody should have the right to choose whatever goes into their bodies.
It's not totally against being vaccinated, or I'm vaccinated. I'm here because I find that the freedoms of all of these people in Canada is being squashed.
For more on the legal questions around the vaccine card and federal vaccine mandates, we're joined by Catherine Reppel. She's an employment and human rights lawyer. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Anita.
Catherine, critics have called the vaccine passport and these vaccine mandates a governmental overreach into people's lives. Does this break charter rights?
Most likely it does. In typical situations, the government has no ability to step in and force a person to make certain medical decisions or take certain medical treatments. That's most likely covered under Section 7 of the Charter, and to some extent can be covered under the Section 2 relating to freedom of religion. So this is something that's quite unusual and can certainly consist of a violation of charter rights. Unfortunately, we don't have any decisions in analogous circumstances, so it's a bit hard to say that at the moment for certainty.
But all of that being said, I mean, governments obviously have their own lawyers, their own legal advice. So if this legislation does violate the charter, how would that actually affect enforcement? Is this sort of a non-starter?
Not necessarily. So charter challenges will need to be brought by individuals in the courts, and they'll need to go through that process to judgment. And there are certain delays and timelines built into that process. So in the meantime, we would expect to see enforcement of those mandates while those challenges occur, and any changes would happen potentially after.
Now, I know you can't predict the future, but having worked in this line of law before, do you think that there will be lots of cases brought against the government?
It seems likely, based on the reaction that's been happening so far from the public. We've heard of one potential claim against a university or a college in Ontario for its vaccination policies. So given the uniqueness of the situation and the lack of flexibility in some of the rules, we're expecting there to be challenges, certainly.
And finally, what influence does the public support for vaccine mandates? Because there are a lot of people who support these things. What does that have on the legal process around this legislation? Does it count for anything?
Not necessarily. So, in a society like Canada and other democratic societies, there needs to be ability to protect differences of opinion and to allow people to make personal decisions. And that's, for the most part, guaranteed by our charter. However, our charter in and of itself has abilities to override those rights in certain circumstances. So generally, something like public opinion isn't going to be sufficient to override those rights. So we do expect the courts, when they're faced with those challenges, to make the decisions based on the set tests that are in place. Most of those have to do with the proportionality of the measure and the circumstances, its connection to the issue, and whether it may or may not be an impermissible overreach.
Employment and human rights lawyer Catherine Reppel, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Anita.
Historic and deadly flooding. Ida may not be the hurricane she was when she hit Louisiana, but she still packed a wallop. The impact on the eastern seaboard next. And at 6:39, a live shot of Penticton. Beautiful clear skies in the interior and sunny warm temperatures for the weekend there, but a bit more of a mixed bag here on the coast. Johanna breaks it down next.
The Athabasca sand dunes in northern Saskatchewan is a surreal landscape in the middle of Canada. Some dunes are 30 meters tall and hundreds of meters long. The sand covers an area of 50,000 hectares. It's the world's largest northern dune landscape. And summer is when the dunes are on the move. Sun reflects off the exposed sand and creates hot air updrafts that suck in cooler air from over Lake Athabasca. These strong winds sculpt the sand into huge dunes. Over the years, these dunes slowly migrate across the landscape into the surrounding forest. As they grow, they become unstable. The wind pushes the sand over the top, sliding the dunes slowly forward into the forest. It's only a matter of time before these trees will be completely swallowed. A slice of the Sahara in the middle of the boreal forest.
I was out yesterday mowing the lawn in my backyard and I found a wild puffball. So these are mushrooms. They grow about the size of basketballs. And this is a wild edible that's extremely easy to forage, but very rare to find. You don't actually go looking for them so much as you happen upon them, and it's really lucky when you find them. So in terms of wild mushrooms, you definitely want a guide that knows exactly what the mushroom is you're foraging for. A lot of people who aren't experts in the field of mushrooms shouldn't be necessarily picking them, but this is a wild edible that's really safe to pick, provided it hasn't gone to spores and all powdery inside. They're delicious to eat. You'll see when we rip it open, it's just like pure white all the way through. It has a beautiful smell of mushroom. Kind of sounds like a basketball. It's still dense, it hasn't gone to spores. Puffball mushroom is extremely versatile. They make delicious soup. It's got a really pronounced mushroom flavor. You can grill it like a steak. You can chop it up and saute it with butter and garlic. Really, you can use it as you would any other mushroom. It's a nice, tender, delicious flavor.
With the Kabul airport currently out of operation, Afghanistan's land borders have become even more crucial for people trying to flee the Taliban and for commercial traffic. But it means those crossings are now flooded with travelers. The CBC's Susan Ormiston is on the ground at a crucial border town with how the Taliban rule is changing the dynamic there.
This convoy of trucks has just left Afghanistan, bringing fresh produce into Pakistan. We've seen things like tomatoes and onions and cotton goods, all coming from the border crossing just about a kilometer down this valley, a very important economic link for both countries. And it is open now, but there's long lineups, sometimes days of lineups of these trucks trying to go back and forth. How does he feel about the Taliban taking a new government?
Everything fine there. The government is good because we used to pay money, but now we can free.
We were down there for a couple of hours today, and we saw just a trickle of Afghans coming into Pakistan. The country has said with 1.5 million refugees here already, they can't handle tens of thousands more, so they're only letting in those for medical emergencies or who have business on either side of the border. The UN is warning of a humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, and this kind of commerce going in is a critical link, especially with the airport closed. So these trucks are going into Afghanistan. We saw young boys down at that border hiding in the wheel wells of trucks coming from Afghanistan. Once into Pakistan, they jump off with bags of what looked like produce over their shoulders to go sell in the market. The UN is warning that up to 500,000 Afghans may try to flee their country by the end of this year. They'll be trying to get to land borders like this, but in many places they're blocked from moving on. Susan Ormiston, CBC News at the Torkham border crossing in Pakistan.
Millions of Americans woke up this morning to scenes of utter destruction. Overnight, the remnants of Hurricane Ida slammed the Northeast. The rain and wind were lethal. Tonight, at least 43 people from Maryland to New York are dead, many in their own flooded homes. Carolyn Dunn takes us through a storm that was unexpected and frightening.
For some today, the only way out was up. Many of those rescued trying to focus on what was saved.
I know we lost everything, but materialistic everything, that you can just repair, but family you can't bring back.
Ida's second act, record rainfall in record time, causing deadly flash flooding. Some drowned in their cars. Others couldn't get out of basement apartments or homes before the water rushed in. A frightening and sudden end.
No idea that such a horrible fate could befall them. Families in mourning right now. We need to be there for them.
Ida laid bare how ill-prepared infrastructure in the mid-Atlantic states is to withstand such a storm. From powerful waterfalls in New York's underground subways to crews trying but failing to keep storm drains clear.
Ida beating everybody up.
Fueled by climate change, storms are more frequent and stronger than ever.
It broke a record literally set 1 week earlier. That says to me that there are no more cataclysmic, unforeseeable events.
Yo, this is crazy.
A terrifying thought for anyone who has witnessed any of the tornadoes that spun out of Ida.
It was pretty quick. Wind, maybe 5 minutes, and then just everything was decimated.
I looked out and I saw my furniture just whoosh. My backyard furniture just went, and then we just went down the basement, and then it just went through the back of my house.
Now they're left to pick up the pieces of what remains, while urgent calls for rescue continue and the death toll climbs. Carolyn Dunn, CBC News, Washington.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe is here now. Joe, those photos just devastating. What is still left of Ida tonight as it moves through Atlantic Canada?
Yeah, Anita, it continues to dissipate, but we're now talking 6 days after landfall, over 1,000 kilometers away, and it's still causing flooding on the Canadian border. Let me show you what this looks like on the satellite and radar. It's actually merged with an extra tropical storm, so a regular old frontal system that we get. But that's part of the concern when we get these late summer, early fall tropical storms landfalling in North America. They'll sometimes get this second punch when they're lifted by another storm. So this is really a hybrid storm that you're looking at right now, spreading rain across New Brunswick. We saw flooding and road closures through all 3 maritime provinces. And we have continued rainfall and wind warnings in place tonight. It's Western Newfoundland that will take the brunt of Ida. 80 millimeters, but in a short amount of time. So concerns for flooding before Ida finally makes that exit. But as we keep hearing the fingerprint of climate change all over this one, take a look at the flood warnings still in place across parts of the mid-Atlantic coast. Amazingly, This was the first time a flood emergency was issued last night in New York City. Those warnings are saved for the most dire of situations, and we've never seen them in this part of the country. We know because of studies that for every 1 degree of warming, the atmosphere, a saturated atmosphere, is able to hold 7% more moisture, and that is why these events are being enhanced by climate change. And we know we're going to see more of them. The Northeast definitely taking the brunt of those enhanced events, but this is certainly under the umbrella of what has been a shocking summer around the world for climate change and weather events. Taking you to our West Coast forecast, where it's nice to see some moderate temperatures as we look towards the other side of our fire season. 26 tomorrow in through Kelowna, a couple degrees warmer over the next couple of days, but staying below 30. Cranbrook, I think you'll stay sunny through the long weekend and into early next week. The Kootenay's kind of missing the systems that are hitting central and northern coastal sections right now. But let's take a look at that rainfall. How much are we going to get with the next couple of systems? Because the one that's hitting central coast right now, that will not be Vancouver's rainmaker. You can see through to Saturday evening, though, getting some yellow bullseyes on the coast. That's the 40 to 60 millimeter range. And by Saturday night, you can just see that green sneaking into Vancouver. So I do think it's going to be a Saturday night into Sunday morning story for us on the south coast. You can see temperatures over the next couple of days warming, but again, staying below the seasonal mark, even in through places like Osoyoos and Vernon. Temperatures for Vancouver will also stay seasonal this weekend. Earlier, it looked like that cold front was going to really drop our temperatures this weekend, but I think we'll stay seasonal and then warming up a little through early next week. So here we go, a 20 tomorrow. So temperatures more reminiscent of yesterday across Metro Vancouver. We're a little warmer than that today, and increasing cloud. I think by the end of the day, we'll be all clouds above us. Saturday night into Sunday, we'll get those showers. Anita, the new models are just showing a smattering of rain, so not a washout. Start thinking about outdoor plans all 3 days. Just saying, it's on the table now.
Wow. All right. Can't wait to make that happen. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
2 Canadian athletes with a long history of medaling, even in these Paralympics, were the focal point of day 9 at the Games. They pushed this country's medal count even higher today, but did they climb that coveted top step of the podium? Devin Haru takes us to Tokyo.
Day 9 at the Paralympics was always going to be about 2 of Canada's brightest stars, Brent Lakatos and Aurélie Rivard, back in competition a day after winning more medals for Canada. So let's go to the Tokyo Aquatic Center first. 25-year-old Rivard out of Quebec, swimming in the 100-meter backstroke event. And guess what? She didn't disappoint. Swimming to silver, it's her 5th medal of these games. She has 2 golds, 1 silver, 2 bronze. Incredible stuff. She has 10 medals in her Paralympic career. Now to National Stadium, where Brent Lakatos, 41 years old, looking for a gold medal at these games. He already has 3 silvers. In an interview yesterday, he says, "I just want gold." He has to settle for another silver. In driving rain, less than ideal conditions at National Stadium here in Tokyo tonight, Lakatos trying to push for gold, falling just short, finishing 2nd. His 4th silver medal of these games, and incredibly, his 11th career medal at the Paralympics. Much more ahead, 3 days left of competition in these games. Mark this one on your calendar. Canada's sitting volleyball team going up against China in the semifinals, 7:30 a.m. Eastern time, back home Friday morning in Canada. It's the first time this program has made it this far at the Paralympic Games. So get ready for the finish. Extensive coverage continues. Devin Haru for CBC Sports in Tokyo.
They're back. 40 years later, the iconic Abba are set to be reborn. The big questions are you going to take a chance on them?
I think it's kind of neat to be able to paint figures and people with plants. But this really does give it a nice view into the range of colors that you're actually able to get from the botanicals. As I'm walking, I'm, enjoying the scenery and everything, but at the same time, my eyes are down at the ground looking to see if there's any, unusual little flowers or looking for berries. Maybe I'm looking at everything in a bit of a different way than I used to. This is such an amazing place. This is my favorite place in the whole world, Newfoundland is. I do a ton of walking and hiking and kayaking, so I just bring baggies wherever I go and see what I can find. It's kind of like seeing that something that you love and something that is so beautiful can also be beautiful in another way that we may not have thought about before. So all of a sudden, a purple flower becomes this stunning forest green color that I can paint with. It's crazy. I like to take the petals, and quite often when I'm picking them, if I want to see if they're really going to, or might get a hint of whether or not they're going to give me any sort of color, I can just, rub them on my hand, or sometimes I carry a little bit of paper with me and I'll rub them on the paper and you might get something totally different. The way that I do it mostly is to mash the ingredients down as much as I can in some water and let it simmer for a while. After it cools down, I strain it and see what I have left. And at that point, it's usually a very nice clear pigment. I add a mordant, which is usually, it can be alum when I put it in, is like fireworks. It brightens up the colors and usually gives you something completely different than you had before. So it's just magical. The color that you have in your jar, the color that you've made, can look completely different when you put it on paper. It's incredible. And then as you watch it dry, it's changing again. They're like living paintings. It's using what's around us that's so beautiful and seeing what it can become.
I feel like I need to sing this one, but it's not going to happen. Mamma Mia, here they go again. After 40 years, Abba is reuniting. They've got a new album and they're putting on a series of concerts with a modern twist. And as Chris Brown shows us, fans are excited about the group's return.
Dancing queens and ABBA fans everywhere had been teased a reunion of Bjorn, Benny, Frida, and Agneta could happen, but then nothing for years, until today. First, a splashy global launch on YouTube, and then the release of the first new ABBA song in almost 40 years. This one is Still Have Faith in You.
I still have faith in you.
A new album of 10 songs is out in November with a stage performance of sorts to follow after that.
We were in London 3 years ago. I said to Bjorn, do you think it's very clever if we try to tour this thing? Because it's technically immensely complicated.
Knowing me, knowing you.
The performance will be digital, with the group using 160 cameras to capture the movements of the foursome, which will then be projected onto a stage in a specially designed London venue.
Give me a vaccine appointment.
Social media platforms such as TikTok have brought Abba's music to younger audiences. Then there's the movies and the musicals.
Abba fans love the band and the music, but will they pay to see a digital recreation on stage instead of the real thing?
This superfan who edits the group's magazine says you can't satisfy the hunger for Abba, so yes.
If the holograms are realistic, I think that will draw people in.
Brilliant. Digital or no digital, as long as Dancing Queen comes back on, we're good.
They play Dancing Queen, everybody dances.
Yeah, every wedding there's
I'm
Abba.
having that at my funeral.
If you change your mind.
Abba famously broke up after both married couples in the band got divorced. Today, though, in a statement, all four spoke of their joy at this project and their friendship for each other. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
I don't know, I might have the controversial opinion, but I want the real thing. Still, this will be great. That is it for our show tonight. Thanks for watching CBC Vancouver News. Tanya Fletcher is here at 11 o'clock after the National.